As Jesus started on his way, a rich young man ran up to him and fell on his knees before him. "Good teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus looked at him and loved him. I must confess the story of this rich young man has always given me mixed feelings. On the one hand, it contains one of the sweetest sentences in the whole Bible. Jesus looked at him and loved him. He looked at him with that penetrating gaze that sees deep inside him. Now, not all of us want people to look at us that way. Some of us wouldn't mind wearing those reflective sunglasses, as the old song said, "Zonbrilletjies to hide behind." I wasn't all that keen on people looking too acutely at me when I was in the ministry. When I was in my 40s, quite often people would come and say to me, "Pastor, you look so tired." One day in church I was talking about the stoning of Stephen, and his face looked like an angel, and I said, "I'm tired of people telling me I'm tired. I wish someone would tell me I look like an angel." And at the door one lady came to me and said, "Andrew, you look like a tired angel." By the way, shortly after that I started wearing glasses, and would you believe from that time on hardly anyone ever said I looked tired. Even these transparent lenses cover a multitude of sins. But Jesus looked at that young man, and he looked within him and he saw someone who from boyhood had longed to be righteous, who had a heart for God. Like Nathanael, a man without guile, and Jesus loved him. Wouldn't it be wonderful to know that Jesus looks into us and says, "I see everything inside you, and I still love you." And so this man comes and says, "How can I inherit eternal life?" And here the story gets difficult because Jesus gives him a very difficult answer. He says, "Go, sell all your possessions and give it to the poor and come and follow me." Now we need to be very careful in interpreting the synoptic gospels in isolation because we can come to some wrong conclusions. For example, here we could say the rule is that you can't get into heaven unless you give away all your possessions. Well, in that case, the kingdom of heaven is going to be very empty. My brother knew a man who, when he was young, bought a very modest house in Camps Bay in Cape Town. And then he became very successful and very wealthy. But he said, "I'm not going to live in a mansion in Constantia," and he stayed in that house the rest of his life. It was as if he said, "I'm not going to live on 9/10 and give away 1/10, which, by the way, I think is a good rule of thumb for all of us." He said, "I'm going to live on 1/10 and give away 9/10, and he gave away a tremendous amount to mission work. And yet by our rule, we'd have to say he still won't get into heaven because he didn't give away everything. There's something wrong here. So what's going on? I think Jesus is using a well-known Jewish teaching technique called magnification. You magnify something almost to the point of absurdity in order to teach a point. For example, he says you can't get the camel through an eye of a needle. Now imagine coming to a great big slobbery camel and taking him by the nose strap and say, "Here, I want you to get through the eye of this little needle." Of course, it's absurd. I think he's doing the same with this rich young man. He's showing the impossibility of getting into heaven by good works. Heaven is infinitely pure, and the pass mark to get in is 100%. If we want to get in by good works, we must make sure we have never looked at a woman lustfully and we've given away all our possessions. And so the disciples rightly say, "How is it possible for anyone to be saved?" And Jesus answers, "With God, all things are possible." God has another plan. By the way, one Sunday school teacher said to her class, "With God, all things are possible." And one little boy said, "Yes, ma'am, but have you ever tried to put the toothpaste back in a toothpaste tube?" With God, all things are possible. By the way, that doesn't mean to say all things are guaranteed. That's a different thing. On the cross of Jesus Christ, God did the impossible. He made it possible for all of us sinful human beings to gain access to the perfect place called the kingdom of heaven. And so we need to be careful when we're interpreting the synoptic gospels. We must interpret them in conjunction with the rest of the New Testament, in conjunction with the Gospel of John, which is more interpretative. And he says, Whoever believes in the Son will have eternal life. Belief, not behavior. And then Paul, by grace are you saved through faith, not by works. But to that we must add the book of James, which says faith without works is dead. And we're back to the Synoptic Gospels, where Jesus is saying, if you want to follow me, it has to be wholehearted, lifelong commitment. And so do you think this young man found his eternal life? I'm confident he did. I think Jesus loved him too much for anything else to have happened. I can easily imagine on the day of Pentecost, he was one of the 5,000 who by faith committed his life to Jesus and received eternal life as a gift. And the faith by which he did that, I'm sure, was not a faith without works. I wonder what he did with all his money. You know, one day I think I'll ask him.